Court here in San Joaquin County. She was appointed in 2011. 2021?
Yeah. I was like, wow.
2021.
You're so sorry. I was like, 2021.
You know, my age, time just goes. She is very active in the community. She's on many boards. Where there's a need, Erin will find a way to serve. She came to us directly from the courthouse this morning where she does adoption Saturday. And she took that on, of course, and she takes on everything. She has been involved with Very Grave Children's Foundation, the San Joaquin County Bar, and of course, Leadership Stockton, Alumni Association, the Greater Stockton Chamber of Commerce. And what really, from talking to you a few months ago, I think what really gets her heart sparked is when she is teaching about law. She's an advocate and a presenter for judges in the classroom, which goes throughout the county into high schools. Yeah, mostly high schools, right? And so, as we all have discussed in groups, and the civic education that our youth are getting these days might not be enough. And Erin, I'm going to call you Erin.
Yeah, no, you should all call me Erin. Please, thank you.
So,
yeah, no.
or no, about 14. But so Erin's really trying to correct that. So this is her program. There will be time for questions.
Oh yes, I have lots of slides that prompt you to ask me questions. So.
And there will be a little group thing.
There are also some group exercises where I'm going to ask all of you how you think we can improve or change or modify the Constitution. So just some fun things to do. So thank you, Susie, for your kind words. I came from Adoption Saturday, and I made my 17-year-old daughter and her classmate volunteer this morning, despite it being the start of their Thanksgiving break from school, because I think it's so important to see happy things that happen at the courthouse. But Susie's right. I have tried for many years to get civics in the classroom, and there's a wonderful statewide program. It's called Judges in the Classroom, and we go and we teach different components of either a constitutional amendment, or we just teach about the 3 branches of government. And I actually gave this handout because it's what I give every class that I go to, because I'm always amazed how people have no idea that there are 3 separate but equal branches of government. I'm always amazed how people don't understand just anything about the court system. People think I can arrest people. People think that I have all of this power that I don't have. And they're also often just confused about how things work in the legal system and then just overall in government. And so I have this presentation today. It's actually called We Are Equal, and it's because of the Constitution. But I start with, it's a 200-plus-year-old doctrine, and so why do we care about the Constitution? And I, especially when I talk to teenagers, I ask them, well, do you want to have the right to hold opinions that differ from others around you? Do you want to write and publish what you think? Can you worship as you believe? Can you protest to your government if you disapprove of its policies? Can the government come and search and seize your property? Can you be arrested and held with no trial or hearing? Can the government treat you differently than it treats other people? And so I tell them, because you live in this country, you should know your constitutional rights, so not only can you assert them, but you can understand how your government works. And so I know, as you're all here as a part of the League of Women Voters, and I know you know all of that, but it's just things that I try to always instill and bring to the forefront about why this document, as some slides will show, is ever evolving and changing, and how it's so important in so many facets of our life. Certainly I see it in my work each and every day, and how it impacts people in different ways, but I just think if they don't have an appreciation for what it is, and I actually I keep the Constitution on my bench in court, and I'm reminded of it each and every day. So if Susie doesn't mind going to the next slide. So anyways, I'm sure you all know this, but it is, I remind people it's a living document, and it can be amended, and even though we only have 27 amendments, it doesn't mean that in the future we won't have other amendments, and it is the supreme law of the land, and so I'll have Susie go to the next slide. And This is actually important. I don't know how many of you have seen Hamilton, the musical, right? And I tell my daughter, how lucky are you to grow up in a time when you get to see Hamilton? When they taught me government in high school, it was like 4 old white guys. Oh, okay, cool. I mean, and now you can actually, they have musicals on Broadway or on Disney that you could watch about who wrote the Constitution, how our country was started. So anyway, I just thought that was funny to show this slide. So next slide. And so I think it's pretty incredible just that long ago that people have a foresight to not just come up with the form of our government, but the rights and the rules that we have to live by for the people, so for all people. And I know that definition has changed over time, but. So I think this quote is particularly relevant still, and so I won't read it to you, but the thing that's also remarkable to me is that the Constitution and the form of our government creates 3 branches that are all equal. And the Constitution is the basis for all the power that each branch has. The next slide. Of course, the Magna Carta influenced the Constitution and the form of our government. We'll go to the next slide. And I remind people, no one branch has all the power. I give examples. The courts do nothing until someone brings something to us. People always forget that. So we're a very reactive branch. So a controversy can be out there, but the court may never do anything about it if nobody files a lawsuit or nobody files a petition. And so it's also true, laws don't get changed if you don't talk to your legislature and to get the laws changed. I'll give an example. There's a lot of things going on, particularly with criminal justice reform, and I'm amazed by how the average person has no idea what laws are being passed in Sacramento that impact your everyday life. And I try to talk to folks about figuring out who represents you and who your elected officials are, and it does have a real world effect on what it is that they're passing and how that impacts you. I'm amazed every year when we have propositions and people, they don't even read what they are, or they read what they are and they don't do any other research or have any other information. So I know all of you are good stewards of figuring that out, but anytime you can talk to people about being more engaged in what's happening, but I tell you there are real things that are happening in Sacramento, and when people come to the courts and ask us to do something about it, there's nothing I can do. I have to follow the law that's been passed by the people in Sacramento, and that doesn't always often seem fair and just to folks, but if you're not following what is being passed by our elected officials, you can't expect the court to change the law. And so I really just impress upon people that each branch serves a distinct purpose, but who do you need to focus on when you have an issue, and who's going to solve that? Now, if it's something that's passed that's unconstitutional, sure, that's within my purview to make that determination. But it's a law that you just think isn't fair or shouldn't, I'll give you an example. There's a lot of resentencing, and people are wondering why all of these people are getting out of prison or jail, and that's because the legislature has decided as a group that certain people should either not spend as much time in jail or prison, or they shouldn't be prosecuted for particular crimes. And so people will come to court and they'll say, well, I don't understand why this person is only getting a slap on the wrist per se, or they don't have to serve any time. And it's like, well, because the laws have changed, and if you think that punishment should be different, it's not for the court to decide, it's for the legislature to decide. So, go to the next slide. And so anyways, that's also in your handout about what each branch does and how each branch, of course, in the state it's the governor, not the president. And so our branch of government in state is the same as it is in the feds. Go to the next slide. The duplicate, sorry, Susie. These are the 3 articles of the Constitution. Article 3 is the judiciary that governs everything there is to do about judges. from our federal constitution. Article 1 is the legislature, Article 2 is the executive branch, and so we have a similar provision in California. Article 6 is what governs the judiciary. I know that because I was recently up for re-election. Most people don't know state judges in California, even if you're appointed by the governor, so you're appointed by the executive branch, you must be re-elected to office by the people every 6 years. Except for the first time after you're appointed, it's the next general election. So I was appointed by Governor Newsom in 2021, and in 2024, which is our next general election cycle, I have to be re-elected and I serve a 6-year term until re-election. That is not true if you're a federal judge. Once you are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, then you are appointed for life. And so there is a difference between state and federal judges in terms of how long they have to serve. And ultimately, I will say who is responsible to keep them in office, right? So you can unseat a state judge, and there have been judges, not very often, that have been recalled, and people can run against you. But that's not true if you're a federal judge. You have a lifetime appointment, and you have to be impeached in order to lose your seat as a judicial officer. So we both have judges, but we treat them very differently under the Constitution. When California became a state and wrote its Constitution, it didn't match the Constitution of the United States, where it's lifetime in Article 3. It's not lifetime in Article 6 under the California Constitution. So there's some differences there depending upon where you are. And so this is true both state and federal. We have one Supreme Court of the United States, and then we have a California Supreme Court, and then we have inferior courts. And on the handout, I did break it down. We call them the same in state and federal court in terms of Supreme Court and appellate court. Federal court, you're a district court judge. In state court, you're a superior court judge, and you control or you oversee a particular county or a particular area. So I always get, and this is from Alexander Hamilton, I actually didn't know he said this. I do a whole separate presentation on judicial independence, and I have a few slides here. But again, in 1787, he had the foresight to say this, is that you want impartial administration of the laws. And I often ask people, and I think it's on the next slide, Susie, and I'm going to ask all of you, what does this word judicial independence mean to you? Like the first time I'm asking, yes.
Well, judicial independence means that each judgeship, so to speak, can speak or write differently on different opinions.
Okay.
Or interpret things differently.
So you could get 5 judges up here and we could all say something different.
No.
Okay, just want to be sure.
No, that judicial independence for that state or for that particular state, they will take care of that state. And I think that's why we have laws in one state versus another state. And then later when it goes up to the big place, then they can interpret their judicial independence over the state versus the federal, or federal versus state.
Anyone else have a different thought on that term?
Well,
Yes.
I agree with her, but I also think it's independent from the other branches.
Because we are separate but equal, so we're separate. I know I just told you that judges have to be re-elected, but do we, as judges, make promises to the people that vote us in? Ethically, we're not supposed to under our election rules, but do people in Sacramento that want to get your vote for assembly or senate, does the governor want to make promises to you about what he or she's going to do to make a better budget, increase government spending or decrease government spending? Judges aren't allowed to make any promises to their constituents. Am I supposed to be persuaded by public opinion?
Yes.
Somebody said yes. Tell me more about that.
Well, isn't interpretation of the law to the person who's going to either follow that law or enforce that law? So, I might think the law one way, the police officer who arrested me thinks it another way, and the two attorneys that might be involved think it other way, and you as the judge might see it another way, and it would be a hope that if a lot of people said, oh no, Bill's right, that you would side with Bill.
I mean, I certainly think that's how law evolves, right? I mean, I think that, but unfortunately, the facts of the case may dictate a different result that the law that we apply, but we're supposed to apply the law as written, whether I personally agree with it or not. And then, of course, an appellate court or the Supreme Court may tell me differently someday. But if you go to the next slide, these are the benchmarks, the highlights, that we're not subject to pressure and influence, and we're free to make impartial decisions based solely on the law and the facts, not public opinion. I have not yet had an occasion, I've been in the newspaper for cases that I've had, but I've not yet had an occasion, and I say not yet because hopefully I'll have a long career of another 20 years, where there's going to be outrage perhaps about something that I do in a decision that I make. Frustration from either one side or the other, a victim, perhaps if it's a criminal case, or in a civil context, somebody loses emotion or that sort of thing. And the person they're normally upset with is the judge, not the lawyer, right? You see in the headlines, it's the judge who made the decision. But I am not in any way going to be influenced by what the news media or really social media writes about me. If I'm following the law as it currently is written and the facts that are presented to me in court, I'm free from shifting political climate. If I was a judge 25 years ago, we had a Republican governor, and maybe they had different policies and platforms that they were encouraging versus what the state may be promoting today. But regardless, that's not my job, is to promote the governor, despite being the person who appoints most judges, is I'm not there to be an advocate for their platform. That's not my role. That's the role of the legislature, right? To advocate in the state assembly or state senate for bills or ideals that they want. That's not what you want your judges to do, because your judge is randomly selected. So if you have a lawsuit, you come to court, and you're like, oh, I drew that guy Castillo, and I know she's just a mouthpiece for Governor Newsom. I really wanted Judge so-and-so because they were appointed by ex-governor, or they were elected to office and they're not beholden to any governor. You don't want that with the people that you don't want that to happen to you when you come in for your lawsuit, because that's not the role of the judiciary. This is a great, where do most people, especially young people, although I will say, even when I have jurors come in, most people know what they know about the law, or perhaps even about the legislature, from TV and movies, right? We think the judge looks like this, or says this, or acts this way. And so I always want to know, do you think the TV and movies add or detract from our understanding of the courts, and I think more broadly our system of government?
Both.
Okay, tell me one on each way.
Well, you learn the substance of things from the TV. You also get some interpretation, but you are negatively impacted by the fact that you are influenced in ways that you should not be.
Mm-hmm.
So it does, it's pluses and minuses, and it depends on what you watch.
Yeah.
And where you start from, and what sort of critical structure you have to deal with the information that you take in.
I haven't seen the movie Inherit the Wind, but I was reading about it the other day, about the Stubbs trial. from what I can tell, at least in the play on which the movie is based, the judge would rule for the defense. When the defense would raise an objection, the judge would uphold it, and it biased the case. It required the required the person defending Snopes to come up with a really novel way to make the case, because everything that he was trying was being deflected. And it does seem to me that even in our system, there are people appointed as judges by a president, for example, because they're expected to have a certain bias or bent.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, and I've watched over the years. Even as a young person, I didn't know that I wanted to become a lawyer or even become a judge. But I remember watching the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings, and I actually rewatched them recently as a judge. They were replaying it. I don't know why. Okay, but I watched several of them, and yes, we have quite politicized our judicial branch, and I think that people then forget that we are separate and that we are bound by judicial independence. We have a canon that says, it's our duty to be fair and impartial, patient, dignified, and courteous at all times. And I'm not sure that you often see that from judges on TV or movies, but that is an ethical obligation that we are bound to follow at all times. And yes, I do think that the perception, at least, is if you are appointed by or selected from this particular group, you are going to be their spokesperson, their advocate, their mouthpiece on the bench. And that is actually the exact opposite of what the founding fathers had envisioned for the judiciary. I will say one of the most accurate legal films in terms of process and procedure, surprisingly enough, is My Cousin Vinny. We show it in when we have judges who teach evidence, and there's actually really good points about what you actually do in court for expert witnesses or how a trial is done. When I talk to jurors or I talk to people that interact with the court system, they're like, it's just so painfully slow. And I'm like, it is, because trials end and start in a day on TV or in the movies or in a couple of days, and there's so many things happening behind the scenes in real life that the public never knows about. And so, of course, in a 2-hour movie, everything's going to end and begin and end in the same little breath. But that's not true in real life in court, and all the mechanics that go on in order to actually put that trial on, get jurors in, and get through the process. Yeah.
So everybody has a bias.
Mm-hmm.
And we see judges with bias, and that bias can be influenced by social media and other groups. So there isn't a book that says you'll interpret this law this way and everybody does it that way. You're given a law, and it's left up to you to interpret how that law, if I'm understanding this correctly, how that law is interpreted, and your biases and every other judge's biases affect how that law is interpreted. Am I seeing that correct?
Oh, yeah, you're not wrong at all. No, sir. And there's principles that guide us when we're interpreting, a statute, or for example, I will say we go through training. I actually had to go to judicial college, which I think most people don't know about. We have to go to new judges orientation. We have rules that govern how often we have to go to training, whether that's for ethics or for substance. We take classes on bias because we tell jurors, and that's true of judges, we all have bias. The importance is we're supposed to recognize our bias, and then we are given tools of how to try to ensure that those biases are not then interjected into the decision that we have to make. And so a lot of judges have different techniques about how they absorb the information. It's why we have court reporters. As a side note, though, it is a profession that is dying, quite literally. And people are desperate. If you know any young people who do not want to go to college but want to go to court reporting school, I'll give you an example. It's crazy. LA County is giving a $50,000 signing bonus to start as a court reporter at their court. Our court is giving $10,000 as a signing bonus. I cannot impress upon you the dire need for court reporters throughout the state of California, and what a wonderful profession those that are in it have, but that people just don't have any idea of the dying need. But my point is that they provide us with a record, a cold record that does not contain emotion, and we rely on that record, particularly if we're the decision maker, not the jury, right? Because a lot of cases are jury trial. And I rely on that record, and my colleagues rely on that record to have those facts from what that witness said right there. And that's a technique that we're trained to use, to then go back to the record and to see what the witness said, not to try to remember it, not to try to interpret it, and then use our legal principles to then see what the law says as we apply the facts to that law. And then, of course, being conscientious of our bias. I used to have a judge, she's now retired, she did family law, and she would say, I know one of my biases is when it's a kid under 1, I'm going to tend to lean to give more time to the mother than I am to the father, but I know that about myself. So every time I have a case involving someone under the age of 1, and I have to make that decision, I have to ask myself, am I making this decision and doing this because I personally believe mom should have more time, or do the facts justify that mom should have more time? So we're all humans, and we all have to recognize that, and we all have to try in each and every way use these tools so that we make decisions in people's cases based on the facts before us in the law. So I think that there's more information out there. I personally am not on social media. Judges can have limited access on social media, but all the ethics opinions highly discourage us from being on social media. So I have no idea what people say about me on Facebook or Instagram or any of those platforms. I'm not on them. My daughter's not on them. And so part of the way that I am not influenced is because I have no idea what's happening out there about what's being said or commented on or any of that sort of thing. Any other comments about, yes?
So, you have judicial independence, but is there any group, person, department that monitors judges and to say, she's a great judge, oh no, he did a bad job, or?
That is an excellent question. So nobody ever tells me if I'm doing a good job unless somebody happens to compliment me one day in court. This gentleman, I was out in Manteca this week, and this gentleman, I was doing criminal law, and I was doing arraignment, so they were coming to court for the first time, and as this guy got up before he was taken back to the custody dock, Judge, I just want to tell you, you have a hard job and you're doing a really good job at it. Like, just out of the blue, just stood up and said that to me. And I said, thank you, sir, I appreciate the compliment. So if judges are not doing what we're supposed to do, I mentioned a judge can be challenged at the time that they are subject to being reelected. So that's one way people can, if they think a judge needs to be out of office. But if a judge, we do have a disciplinary body. It's called CJP, the Commission on Judicial Performance. We've had one judge in our county removed from office for having behavior that was in violation of our canons of ethics. And he was removed from office in 2005. And all of that's public. You can Google what we call CJP. It has information about every judges throughout the state. You can read everything you want, but if the public is unhappy or believes the judge is acting in a way that's unethical, that violates our canons, or violates the oath which we took to uphold the Constitution of both the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of California, that's the body that oversees judges. In addition to, in California, you can be either recalled or you can lose your seat when you come up for re-election. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that does, thank
Yeah,
you.
but in terms of positives, only if this guy happened to say that to me, yesterday in court, so. Yeah, you go to the next slide. Thanks, Susie.
I want to ask
Oh, I wanna ask this question, but, you know, I understand the ethics, and maybe this is just not an appropriate question, but, you know, I have two friends that are judges, and it just kills me whenever I have lunch with one of those friends, and that person won't let me buy the lunch, because it's an ethical thing, and the other person, Barbara, would say it's the appearance of impropriety.
Correct.
And I was practicing law when we were hanging out, so that was one thing, but, so that's.
It's also, just quickly interrupt, it's a disclosure issue. So we have ethical rules and canons that govern judges. It's canons of judicial ethics. But we also are bound by the Fair Political Practices Commission, and FPPC, I don't know if I got the second P right, where we're mandated every year to file a Form 700 and make disclosures. And so if you bought me lunch and it was over $50, I'd have to make a disclosure on that form. And of course, if you're a lawyer who appears in front of me, I can never accept at any time anything from any lawyer, ever. And then of course, there's a lot of other rules that come into play. And so that is also sort of.
So that's just that FPPC type of thing is not for judges at all levels, correct?
In the state system, yes. So a state court judge, regardless if you're California Supreme Court all the way down to the Superior Court, you are required to file a Form 700. You are governed by the California, the Commission on Judicial Performance. That is in the state. The feds, interestingly enough, have a different system, and district court judges and appellate court judges, they're not justices in the fed system. They have an ethical disclosure form, and magistrate judges, but apparently not the Supreme Court. They are exempt in the fed system, not in the state system. The Supreme Court, Supreme Court judges in California, justices in California, 2 were recalled in the 80s. I don't know if any of you remember that. Justice Rose Bird. Yeah, and the other gentleman is Reynoso Cruz. They were both recalled. So in the state system in California, there's a lot more ethical obligations and also disclosures that are required to be filed, and it applies to all levels. And interestingly enough, it's not the same in the federal system.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So yeah. So this is the feds. They have all the districts that are listed. I just showed people this because in the fed system, it's broken up into 11 districts, and then of course DC is always special. And so this is the federal system in terms of the districts that are broken into, we're in the 9th here on the left. And so we'll go to the next slide. This is interesting. I know you can't read it, and I always hate doing slides by this, but the blue represents areas where there are Democratic appointed judges, and then of course the red is Republican appointed judges. And this sort of odd pinkish color could become evenly split if there's further appointments made by President Biden. And so he's currently appointed and have confirmed 150 judges to the federal court. President Trump was over 200 in his 4-year term. And so this map represents the sort of breakdown of that. And I just show it even though I just told you judicial independence means something. I told you it doesn't matter who appoints you. But if you just look at that geographically and see how the whole United States is sort of broken up, it just gives some visual context, I suppose. And the bright purple is 100% Democrat appointed judges. The light blue is 50 to 65%, so more than half. You have one state that's 100% Democratic appointed, and then you have the bright red in 8 and 5, almost 100% Republican appointed. So, yes.
When did it start becoming so political, the Supreme Court?
I say with the advent of social media, but I don't know. I'll ask all of you, those of you that watched Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearing like I did anyone feel like that was political? I mean, that was in the 90s, way before social media. I get a lot of head shaking, yes. It certainly feels that way for this reason. It's appointed, the future justice is appointed by that president, which comes from one particular party. and then of course is confirmed by the Senate, because the idea is if the Senate is evenly mixed and balanced, they'll vet this person. But yeah, and I get so frustrated when people say, that's a Trump judge, that's a Biden judge. No, they're just a judge. I'm not a Newsom judge. And my colleagues are not Schwarzenegger judges or Brown judges or, whatever, Governor Duke Majan. I had a colleague that recently retired that was appointed by Governor Duke Majan. I mean, we're just judges. That's how we all feel despite whoever appointed us. And so it just seems I personally think the way that the news reports it when they say that, when social media does the flashy headline about the person. I had a dear friend that I taught with 2 years ago at the Judicial College, and he was actually being vetted he's a judge in Sacramento, and he was being vetted by the Trump administration to take a federal judgeship. And when some of his colleagues found out that he was being vetted, they ridiculed him because how could you even consider, and he said, because I want to be a federal judge. I mean, that's the process. There's no other process if you want to be a federal judge. You cannot run for office, you have to apply, and you have to be nominated by the president. But it has turned into this ideal that you are a mouthpiece or a spokesperson or an advocate for their platform if you even consider the appointment. And let me ask you, if all of you were being considered by the president in your profession as a judge, you wanted to be a judge or you wanted to go to a different court, is anyone going to say no? I mean, that's an honest question. Is anyone, even if I didn't hypothetically vote for Governor Newsom, am I going to say no to his appointment? I mean, if this is the job that I love, that I look forward to every day, it's not supposed to matter who I came from. And the split on these judges getting through confirmation is also troubling, because it'll be 52 to 40 with abstentions, and it'll be 51 that'll barely make it. And 20 years ago, when my dear friend Connie Callahan was confirmed to the Ninth Circuit, she was 99-0. When's the last time you've seen 99-0?
So did the guy in Sacramento, was he nominated?
No, he did not. He did not ultimately end up being nominated. And then there was, at the end of Trump's term, which a lot of presidents have done, the Senate has done, they did it to President Obama at the end of his second term, they would not move judges forward. So, which again, I don't understand, because that's the system that we have under our Constitution, and it's not supposed to matter which president put the person up for nomination, because they are vetted, they're background checked by the FBI, which you learned a lot about with now Justice Kavanaugh, and so these people go through a lot to get even the nomination, let alone to get to the Senate, let alone to get to the actual confirmation or appointment, or even in California, that's true too, yes.
I just have a question. I went to another state, and I actually met a judge who was in that state, and she was federal appointed. And I never thought about that in states there are federal judges.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, well, she was appointed by the Obama administration in Oklahoma. So how many federal judges? Is there a big federal building that has, kind of help me there? I work for the
Oh yeah, so in California, the federal judges, there's 4 districts in California that have federal judges, and that's at the district court level. So I believe on the district court where it says the federal system here, there's one in Sacramento, that's the Eastern District, so they actually cover Fresno and Sacramento. Then there's the Northern District, that are based in San Francisco. Central District is LA, and the Southern District is San Diego. So there are courthouses located in the 4 districts. And then if you go back to the prior slide, Susie, the main Ninth Circuit, which is the appellate court, is in San Francisco, but any appellate judge can have chambers at a district court location. So my friend Judge Callahan, who's on the 9th, she actually has chambers in Sacramento at the Eastern District Courthouse.
Okay.
So, and then they would have different courthouses throughout. So then they're sitting to hear federal cases, and then in California, I think if you go forward 2 slides for me, Susie, I think I have the states. I don't remember. No, I don't, but.
Matsui building?
Yes, that's right, the Matsui building in Sacramento, that's correct. And then we have 58 counties in California. Every county, I have a California slide coming up, every county has a superior court in the state of California, and then we have different appellate districts and 1 California Supreme Court, whose main courthouse is in San Francisco, but they also work out of Los Angeles. Yeah. Yes.
Looking at that,
This one?
the previous map.
Yeah.
That, District 9 just seems like such a huge number
Yeah.
as far as populace.
Yes, oh yes, and they probably, other than, I would say, New York and, the 5, so 2 and 5, they have the most judges too on the appellate division and the most district judges as well that cover that area.
Well, taking a look at 1
Yeah,
by comparison.
I know, but you have to, this was also designed, if you look visually, where did our country start?
Yeah.
And it's as we moved over. And then I honestly don't know 10 and 11 sort of how the history behind that. And then DC's always been separate. But in terms of the first 7, it's just that the way the country moved to the west and then was split, yeah.
You said that federal judges are appointed and hold office for life unless something happens, whereas in California, they have to be reelected. What's the case in the rest of the country as far
It's state by state for state court judges, so it's state by state. So in some states, judges are always elected. The governor has no power to appoint. We're a hybrid state. So we have the option to become a judge through the executive branch appointing us, or by running for an open seat. But that's California, we have a hybrid system. In other states, it's all election, in some states, it's all appointment. So it really varies throughout the 50 states. It's quite interesting. And as the states adopted their own constitution, they did not follow the federal system on lifetime appointment or the same terms of the Article 3. Like I said, in California, it's Article 6 for judges is written different than Article 3 is written for federal judges. Yes?
Are the appellate federal judges appointed for life to a particular district? Do they ever interchange?
They're appointed to that particular number. So I'll just keep using Judge Callahan, she's appointed to the 9th. And that's where she's at. Yeah. And that's where you are. That's her area. Yeah. They can sit on special assignment as designated by a chief judge. That's also true in our system. We don't necessarily borrow superior court judges from other counties, but our appellate justices, for example, if they're short, they can borrow from the superior court and we can get a temporarily fill a justice's seat if the chief judge allows that to happen. So there's a little intermixing there. So I think we're 2 up. So this is Article 6, Section 1, and that determines we have 3 court systems: the Superior Court, the Appellate Court, and the Supreme Court. Not that anyone's going to go read this, but Article 6, Section 12 is the one that discusses how we have to be re-elected if appointed by the governor. So that was the constitutional section in the state of California that mandated following my appointment, in the next general election, I have to be re-elected, and then every 6 years thereafter. And then, of course, each county has a superior court judge, and then these colors represent the 6 appellate divisions that we have within the state. So the state is broken into 6 appellate districts. We sit in this county in the 3rd district, which is seated in Sacramento, and I must say is one of the most beautiful, courthouses. If you are ever in downtown Sacramento, it's directly adjacent from the governor's mansion or the state capitol. You can go in, and all courthouses are open to the public. It was recently renovated. It's one of the most beautiful built courthouses I have ever been in. And if you're just walking around during the week, I encourage you to go in there. They have a library. It's absolutely remarkable, and that's where our appellate justices and our Court of Appeals sit. And then, interestingly, a lot of people don't know this, in every superior court, we also hear appeals for things like traffic, for things like misdemeanor cases, and for evictions, because those cases shouldn't wait years to have a decision made on an appeal. So the Superior Court also has an appellate division to redress any wrongs that may have been committed by one of their colleagues, essentially. So you can be appealed if I'm doing a traffic trial and someone doesn't agree, they can make a request that the appellate division within our court review that, because if you have to go to the Court of Appeal, you're waiting years to get a decision. So there are certain case types that the actual court, the Superior Court will review. And that's also per Article 6 of the California State Constitution. Yes?
So if I have to go to the Court of Appeals, and you're telling me it's going to take years, the common solution seems to be make more places within District 9 that can have a Court of Appeals, so that it doesn't take years.
So that is something you should lobby with. So we get all of our money.
No thanks.
You know, that's the thing, we have no purse strings, and all of the money, believe it, I mean, the governor sets the budget, or the president with Congress, and in the state, it's the governor with the legislature. We don't get to, the Superior Courts, or the Court of Appeals will say, this is the amount of money we need more judges, but we're bound by whatever the budget is that's approved, that's the funding. And of course, in the recession, their courts were shut down. We had furlough days and layoffs, the whole thing. We're in a much better off financially now than we were, 10 plus years ago. But it's so interesting because in the common political world, right, the legislature will go to somebody in the executive branch and they'll negotiate about what money they need, and maybe a bill will get passed, or they'll have lobbyists that are discussing this, that, or the other, or they'll ask for money from here, from there. If a judge goes to the legislature and says, we really want to start this program in our court, we need this money. If the legislature looks at the judge and says, that's great, I want to make sure that you support me in my next election, will you come to all my fundraising events? The judge is ethically bound to say no, because we're not allowed to endorse or support a candidate for office that's not a judge publicly. We can give money privately up to $500, but that's not what the person in Congress or Sacramento was looking for. So it's just very odd dichotomy of when the judiciary needs money, the purse strings are held by the other two branches, and there's no give or take like there normally is, because that's just the way the system is set up, to do that. So it's often a fight about that every year when the budget comes up. Yeah.
Erin, so who sits on the appellate division in the Superior Courts? It's just a group that's
that's selected by the presiding judge. So currently we have three judges who sit on the appellate division and 2 alternates. I'm an alternate. And so we rotate if there's conflicts or if somebody's unavailable. So we have 3 that are selected by the presiding judge, and then 2, and I'm one of the alternates.
okay.
Yeah. And I wanted to be on the appellate division, so yeah. So this is just sometimes I think visually, how it works. There's actually a case that I teach young people, that actually went from a court in San Diego County up to their appellate district, which is the 6th, up to the California Supreme Court, and then the US Supreme Court took it. It was a 4th Amendment search and seizure question, believe it or not, over this little thing that we all are married to. And the Supreme Court weighed in. The question was, did you need a search warrant to search someone's cell phone? Breaking news, the answer is yes. But the Supreme Court took it up because it was such an issue that affected the entire country. And it actually was decided by the Supreme Court in 2014. But it was a case that came out of San Diego County Superior Court, went all the way up to the state Supreme Court, and then so truly the US Supreme Court is the law of the land and could do something different than what a court in California says. I just use that as an example. So again, visually is because the Constitution governs everything on that slide and so much more, because there's so many things contained in each of these provisions. But I just think it's so important visually to see that this little book that I keep everywhere has something that is important to each and every one of these things. All right, so I told you I have a slide. If you have any questions about what we've covered so far, anything that we haven't covered so far, you guys are a good group. I appreciate the participation. Yes, yes.
We talked about you interpreting the law as it's written within what you understand and you're bound for that. That's the decision phase. What about the penalty phase? Are there guidelines? Are you free to?
Oh. So in criminal, you're talking about criminal cases when you sentence somebody? Yeah. So it's different, believe it or not, in the federal system than it is in the state system. So in the federal system, they have very strict sentencing guidelines. And the judge almost has zero discretion, if any, in imposing a sentence on a criminal case. I would say in California, we certainly have a lot more discretion than the federal judges do. However, that's changing. So what California has is what's called a triad. So somebody who's convicted of, I'll just say a serious crime, that's probably the easiest example. It's a triad, lower, middle, and upper term. So you have a range, okay? And then there's factors that you have to consider. Recently, under criminal justice reform, the legislature has said you cannot impose the upper term, you have to start with the middle term. And if you're going to impose the upper term, you must make a finding of the following factors and considerations. You also have to take into consideration whether or not the person is under the age of 25 years old. So over 18 but under 25. But the legislature has essentially told judges, you need to start in the middle. And if you're going to consider going up, you have to have facts that support all of these findings. And then, of course, different factors if the person is under the age of 25. That's remarkably different than beforehand when we had discretion over a triad of sentencing and we were not mandated to do certain things. The way the movement's been going the last 2 to 3 years with criminal justice reform is the legislature is actually chipping away at judicial discretion for sentencing. And at times it does feel more like it's mandated, like federal sentencing guidelines. And there's pros and cons to either. But to answer your question, and if you're convicted of a crime in state court, you're generally going to start at the middle of the term and go lower than you are before, which you had a range of sentencing. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I have 2 questions. One is pretty easy, dealing with the cell phone, which you mentioned. Now, something must have happened, I don't know if it was federal, state, where if you're helping as a teacher, you have to be real careful in taking a student's cell phone because you may have to pay for the cell phone if something happens and you're a teacher. Have you heard anything on that?
I haven't, but I know the education code has its own body, which I don't think the case involved somebody who was a young person. They were not a minor though. The case I was mentioning, they were in their early 20s and they were pulled over on a traffic stop. A gun was seen in plain view, and they actually, when they took the person into custody, they took his cell phone into evidence, and the detective decided, I guess this person had a very easy passcode and just started going through the person's phone and found a whole lot of evidence about the commission of another crime and gang activity and the like. But I don't know the answer to your question for if you're out of school.
The question number 2 is just real quick. You are not, as a federal employee, supposed to hire a family member. There's a name that is called that you, can be gotten for hiring someone who's a family member. And so, not naming any names, I'm just shocked how some individuals can hire their family members to do jobs that they never had before. So, and how is that exempt in some instances? My thought was maybe somebody else hired
I know on this, our Superior Court application, and I only know this because we hire, what my daughter used to refer to as baby judges. So we have judges and then we have commissioners. I used to be a commissioner, so she said I was a junior judge or baby judge. But on that application, it asks you to disclose if you're related to anybody on the Superior Court, so that and who it is. And then that person who is, and if that person that you're related to is not supposed to be involved in the decision to hire you, it would go to somebody else in that, to make that determination. And I know on the federal application, they do ask if you're related to any judges who serve on the court you're seeking to be, appointed to or serve on. They do ask that question. So, and that's sometimes because there's people that are vetting you, they want to make sure that maybe perhaps if they're asking another judge and you're related to that judge, if they're gonna ask, they know it comes with some lack of objectivity.
The reason I asked that, I worked and person hired their ex-brother-in-law, and later their supervisor came back and actually fired that person. And then later, after it was reviewed by personnel and everybody else, they said it was too severe because the person was in blood related.
Oh,
And
for
that's
marriage,
when it
yeah.
was federal, and that was so that's why I was wondering.
Yes, ma'am.
So we do a lot in the League of Women Voters, and me personally, writing to legislators and et cetera, federal and state. And, you can write to the president if you don't agree with what he or she is doing. How about judges? It has occurred to me to write to Judge Roberts, for example. But in what you're saying, I mean, would they ever even read a letter?
So if it's about a pending case, it wouldn't make it to us because our mail is vetted. I can only speak for my Superior Court, so our mail is vetted by a group of people that work as our judicial secretaries, that's their title, and they go through the mail. If you wrote us a letter that was related to a case that was pending before us, that would be improper because the other side would be entitled to have that information. If a juror wrote me a thank you card, I'd get that. Okay, so it really just depends on what the content is of the message or the purposes of the message. But again, like I started off with earlier, if you're looking to change something of substance in the law, we're not the branch. But if we can do something better, I tell jurors, let us know what your experience was like. And if we can improve the jury system, let us know that, okay? If, we hear you on how we can streamline things, we redid our video, our informational video because of feedback. And so if it's that type of stuff to help process, love to hear from you. But if it's of substance in a case, that would be not allowed. But if you were thanking a judge for their service or when I adopted the families today, that's all okay.
So if you wanted to write to the Supreme Court about their ethics,
yeah,
you could write that.
You could write, it's process. It's process governing that. Like you could write to the CJP and say, about an investigation or asking about ethical rules or that sort of thing. That's totally fine because it's not about a pending case. Yeah.
Go for it, B. Write a letter.
I'm gonna get a big letter.
Yeah. Yes. You can ask why are these judges in California? They have this and they have that, and you could just use all their system. Yeah. Go to the next slide. Yeah. Okay, well, the Bill of Rights, we'll go to the next one. Thanks, Susie. This is what people, I think, commonly think of when they think of the Constitution is the Bill of Rights. It's the things I mentioned at the beginning of my commentary. It's why we have the ability to worship whatever we want to worship, say what we want to say, with some limited exceptions. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. I think it's the most common example, assembly or, to address the government. Go to the next slide, Susie. So this is really, I think people don't think about the Constitution being flexible. I think they think of it as a 200-plus-year-old document. But again, I mentioned earlier, the definition of all people, when it was written 200 years ago, is not the definition of all people we have in 2023. And of course, how it's modified of who can vote, who can own property, who can pass certain rights, that's all evolved over time. And so I think that people forget this, that it's hard to change the Constitution. I'm not suggesting we're all gonna get together and, our amendment's gonna be passed tomorrow, but I think that if people got together and collaborated and there was something that needed to be changed, the citizens have that right. They have the right to get together and they have the right to come together to determine if there needs to be a change. And that's how change is made, right? It's not made by us sitting at home watching our Netflix. It's made by coming to things like this, or getting together, getting people behind you, coming up with ideas and moving those ideas forward, or writing those letters and getting the spark for someone else to do it. Yes?
Does anybody, do you happen to know how long the Equal Rights Amendment has been swinging in the wind?
Forever. I don't. I
Waiting-
could ask
waiting
Google, but
for-
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, I don't. And I think and I don't know, I'd have to go back because it would be interesting to me to see how long it took some of the amendments to get passed. I don't know how long it took the 19th Amendment to be passed. I don't know that off the top of my head. I don't know how long it took for some of the ones that came later, right? After the Bill of Rights was done. I don't know. But I know it didn't happen overnight or in a week or two, and certainly it was not a robust system of mail and email as we have now.
I think that the early amendments to the Constitution did not have any timetable. And it wasn't until I don't know if it was the late 19th, early 20th century that they put in time frames. And so the whole ERA issue is very interesting, since actually there are the right number of states to have it passed. And of course, some states have gone back and they have changed locally that they are now against the ERA, and so, but that hasn't, nothing official has happened there. So we've reached the right threshold, but it'd be interesting to see if, having reached that threshold, it can actually move forward without the Congress having to do something else.
I find nowadays, and you see it now, and with the abortion, people are doing it in their state. Where they live and what's governing them is based on a state-by-state basis. And what I see more often is people moving to change laws in their state, not the United States of America. That's true of drugs, right? We legalized marijuana, Colorado did it first. You see things on a sort of state-by-state basis more than you see today Congress passing something that affects all of us. I mean, that's normally where people have been, I think, focused their efforts on things that they feel like really matter to them, is what it is. Meaning they weren't gonna wait for the feds to say marijuana was legal, they were gonna take it into their own hands. And that's certainly what happened after the decision by the Supreme Court relative to abortion. You now see the states passing their own amendments or protections after that decision. So. Okay, this is the time I thought that we would, if you want to break up into your tables or you want to talk about it as a group, but I would love to hear from all of you if you have thoughts on how you change the Constitution. People have opinions either way, they're happy or unhappy with it, and I'm just curious if anyone has any thoughts about what they would do different.
And if you need some cookies to get your brain stimulated, please help yourself. And
Oh,
there's
yeah.
water.
Yeah, water, and looking at cookies and all kinds of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. There you go, she's done us the ERA.
It seems to me that there might be a way to fix the wording of the Second Amendment so that it couldn't be manipulated the way it is manipulated.
Okay, you have any thoughts of
No,
how?
no, it just came to my
okay.
head right now.
I'm like, I have my thoughts, yeah.
If you,
Well, you talked about the First Amendment, you can't yell fire in a crowded room unless, of course, there's fire. But, yeah, and so, the First Amendment is not absolute.
No.
But the much current thinking seems to be that the Second Amendment is absolute, and I don't see why that should be, when the First Amendment isn't, and that none of them should be without reasonable,
Parameters.
Yeah, it's not an absolute. They didn't have, assault rifles in, in 1776, and, it's just not reasonable to me that there should not be some, ability to work within the Constitution to protect people's rights, but still, to get us away from the craziness that's being allowed under the Second Amendment.
I see a hand, yep.
So, I have heard some judges believe the Constitution should be interpreted as it was written in the 1700s. Other judges believe that it is a living, breathing, adoptable. And to me, it seems, if you're a judge that believes in the interpretation as it was written, then the Second Amendment says you have the right to own a flintlock. Because there weren't AK-47s or automatic weapons when the Constitution was written, and yet there's no provision in the Constitution that says what kind of weapon you can own, unless you believe that the Constitution is a living, breathing, and changes with the time. So, let me add one thing. Why is it legal for me to own an AK-47, but illegal for me to own a bazooka?
It probably depends on where you live, right? Because, I don't think in Texas they're as strict as they are in California. I mean, I'm just making that observation based on my friend that lives in Texas who used to live in California, who is a, gun, I guess, lover, for lack of a better term. Yeah, that's great. Somebody asked really quickly in my book, because I should have gone there, the first 10 amendments, known as the Bill of Rights, were ratified December 15th, 1791. So the first 10 amendments were 1791. Yes, that is there are construction, the way that you can construct or interpret the Constitution, as you mentioned. There's strict constructionism, and there's different judicial philosophies on the interpretation of the Constitution. It's funny to me because that only comes up with federal judges. It's not something that we ever discuss in the state judicial branch. I've gone to tons of training. I teach at the Judicial College. There's never a discussion about how we interpret our laws or the state constitution versus we don't go back to when the state was enacted in 1850, it became a state in 1859, and the Constitution was passed, I think it was in 1863. We don't ever go back and look what it meant at that time. We're bound by the cases that have interpreted the different laws throughout the time, whereby we have general principles in our statutes that tell us how we're supposed to consider something. But this seems to always come up when we're having to interpret the United States Constitution before the United States Supreme Court. So, and I know to the average person, they're like, what? How can you even find anything about what it was like in 1776, right? We preserve documents, and I've been to the National Archives Museum and some of the other Smithsonian museums in DC, but how else does people even have information that go that far back?
So, we had prohibition.
Yes,
and
I
then we
was
got
just
rid
looking
of,
for that one.
and then we got rid of
Yes,
prohibition.
Fairly quickly.
Fairly quickly.
Yeah,
How can you go about?
1 year it said it was repealed. Oh no, I'm sorry, it was passed in 1919, it got rid of 1933.
How can you? So let's take the first and the second
Amendment.
amendments.
Okay.
they're pretty vague in the kinds of language that you can use. Like you said, you can't yell fire in a public.
That was a Supreme Court case.
Yeah.
That kept that, or interpreted the First Amendment to include that as a restriction. Yes.
So, how do you make an amendment more specific?
Well, here's a question, should we?
Yes.
Because that's often what I hear when I read different things about the amendments, that the founding fathers wrote them in a way to be flexible and to have the ability for them to be interpreted by our branch. So I don't know. I mean, do you want something written in such a way where it's so specific? Could we ever account for every possibility? I mean, I gotta tell you, the Fourth Amendment did not contemplate these. Right? And it was quite the case in, for this gentleman by the name of Mr. Riley, of the case I mentioned earlier. So I'm interested to know, would we want to try to, how could you possibly as a lawmaker account for every scenario? I don't know.
Well,
And they say that's sometimes the beauty of the document we have.
Well, in California, you know, we amend our constitution every whip stitch, and so, you know.
My husband's always complaining about how many volumes of books I have, and he's like, wasn't that one volume before? I'm like, it is 3 now, thank you, California State Legislature.
And then there's the education code.
Yeah, and then there's the education code. No, I know, yeah.
That's what I was gonna say, if you put everything in the Constitution, you end up with California's.
We also are a unique state where we have propositions. A lot of other places don't, and other states, they don't have that system of the way in which you can pass them. And then we pass things in, people asked me recently with daylight savings time, Judge, didn't we pass that proposition? We gave the legislature the right to do something about it. Apparently it is just not on the forefront about whether or not we're gonna change that clock anymore or not. You know, so we do pass these things, and,
But
you know.
it's really gonna be up to the courts. I mean, even like the ERA, which many people are, as I've read, you know, think that, boy, if we had the ERA, this whole thing with the Supreme Court and Roe v. Wade would never have happened and whatever, but I am not convinced. I mean, I think the ERA needs to be finalized, but I'm not convinced that necessarily means that all those upcoming cases are gonna be seen the same way just because I see it in a certain way. Like, I think the ERA would cover it, but I'm not sure the courts would always see it that way.
And yeah, and that's the problem I always face with the judiciary, because I've talked to you, or I've said to all of you, there's judicial independence, but I know that average person thinks, yeah, who appoints that judge and where they come from plays some factor into it. And you know, I'm not here to tell you that the process isn't, has some political nature to it in terms of who you have to talk to and what type of person they're looking for. But I believe in my heart of hearts that judges take the oath to uphold the Constitution fairly and impartially, seriously, and that by and large, like with every profession, you have your, you know, not good examples, you know, but I do believe in the judiciary and the judges that I met that those canons mean something, and that when it comes to it, you have the courage to make the right decision based on the law and the facts, and not based on public opinion or who appointed you or who elected you and what promises, which you weren't supposed to make, you know, you've said. Yeah.
It just seemed, I don't know how the Constitution works, but the decisions, some of the decisions of the Supreme Court seem so wrong. I think Citizens United is wrong. and I don't know how they, you know, I'd have to look and see how they came to that decision. But
is that the case involving the discrimination?
Political finance.
Oh, okay, I was thinking of
company equals a person.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the finances are whatever you want to give, $1 gazillion. So where all men are created equal, well, you know, in terms of finances, that's not true. And so all of a sudden, everyone in our Congress and Senate are millionaires. You know, they just are. And so.
So you think they have motivation to change it to something different? I mean, the beauty of our branch is that they're supposed, the government, they're supposed to, but
But the decision came from the Supreme Court.
Right.
So now that, yeah, they need the motivation to change, to adjust the wording. It gets more and more complicated and more wrong.
Right, and I see opinions by the California Supreme Court, which I appreciate, and they say, this is something the legislature needs to take up. Like, they're telling them, like, we can't fix this, and that's, we are taught that we have a box or a lane, and that's where we have to stay, and if it's something the legislature has to fix, then that's who has to fix it, and we're not, but I'm not on the Supreme Court making the law of the land. They may think very differently, but as a Superior Court judge, I am tasked with interpreting the laws before me, and if I think there's something that needs to be fixed, not that it's unconstitutional, but the legislature missed something, then the legislature, if they didn't contemplate it, now is your time to contemplate it and fix it.
What I don't understand is the justification for calling a corporation a person. What in the law justified that decision?
Yeah.
It baffles me.
All I can say is that in terms of when we do trials and there's a jury instruction that says even if the business is being sued, you're not to treat them any differently than if an individual was sitting there. That's actually a jury instruction that I give in civil cases when I've done civil trials, so that the jurors don't think that just because it's, John Smith's Inc., John Smith's repair shop, that they're treated differently than if it was, Dan Smith over here. You're not supposed to assume that they're wealthy or that they have the means to pay for something if they're being sued. But there's actually jury instructions that we give that tell jurors to treat them the same, so that there's not this idea in jurors' minds that they're somehow different or subject to different rules. I'm not suggesting that was the basis. I'm just saying there are other principles in the law where we do treat businesses like individuals for purposes of jurors making decisions on claims against one or the other.
And the other thing that concerns me too is the shall make no regulations concerning religion. And we're always constantly hearing, particularly with the LGBT community, that people are using religion to discriminate against LGBT. And then the courts are upholding that in some cases. Isn't this just sort of putting a little wedge into making more rules based on religion?
Yeah, I think certainly in that opinion, the idea was that they were giving the person the right to refuse whatever services. Now, and remember, it was a private business, and I actually taught this lesson on a First Amendment lesson to a group of 12th graders at West High School a couple of weeks ago, and they were like, what? This website could decide that they didn't want to do web designs for I think it was web design. I know there was the cake case for somebody who was gay or lesbian, and I said, well, they were a private business, and so it was the state anti-discrimination law that they were applying to the private business, and and so I said, the Supreme Court said that private business had the right to decide what customers it wanted to take or not take, and that customer could go to a different business. Now, if it was the government providing services, we would not be able to act in such a manner.
But she was still using religion.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the way the court came down on that was that a lot of it had to do, and I remind people, a lot of it has to do with, is it government action or is it private action? Because that's where the analysis starts in terms of from the court's perspective on the application of certain laws. So, yeah. I'm not suggesting, I'm just, that was the analysis I taught to my 12th graders, which is what the case discusses in the First Amendment, yeah.
you know, in spite of everything you say about judges having to follow the canons of the law and be impartial and everything, every vote almost that you hear from the Supreme Court is so divided by everything.
Party line, right?
Party lines, and it's hard to believe that everybody in that party just happens to interpret the law the same way and doesn't have anything to do with the party.
I know you think it's like they don't sit down and talk to one another. I know, it's so, I completely agree with you that and that certainly is also the way that it's discussed. It's 5-4, all the ex-judges and all justices and all the Y justices, you know, they're on blue and red, you know, I mean, you saw the state geographic map, which is telling also.
And what is the purpose of having them appointed for life?
You know, I do not know what the framers intended in Article 3, but my guess is their lifetime was much shorter than our lifetime. And I don't think they ever envisioned someone serving to, how old was RBG when she passed away? Did they envision that? I'm not sure. I mean, we could maybe do some research, if we're a strict constructionist, to find out. But I think the idea was that, at least what I read in different books, is that it was the commitment to it's a calling and it's a commitment to doing that, but I don't think they ever anticipated that someone would live based on medicine, science, and all the good things we have these days to that.
Don't you think that was part of judicial independence also?
Yes, right.
That so it didn't really matter?
Yes.
I mean, that you were there and you could make your decisions without thinking that the next president was gonna kick you out the door or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that was the goal point, that you're free from shifting political climate, yeah. And I also think, you know, for us, we're reelected, and so the question is for federal judges, who would reelect them? I mean, all 50 states, I mean, that's sort of I think the other underpinning is the territory that they cover, and, you know, having to do that every 4 years or however many years, I guess you would have them as a term. I don't, you know, it'd be kind of odd how you match that up. I mean, it's odd for us too, but we somehow, and every time we go to the registrar, they're like, oh yeah, you're in that judicial election, and it's like we have all these different rules and regulations, and they're always confused, yeah.
So the legislature has an opportunity to change the Constitution, which is then ratified by the appropriate number of states, which changes it. How does a group of individuals go about changing the Constitution?
Well, what do you all think? You're all in this wonderful group, and
You just start at the bottom and work your way up.
And the reason I say that is, an organization as large as ours nationally, you'd think that we would be doing something to change lifetime appointmentship of federal judges. And our group has a national base with which we start from, but having gone to league events and league conventions, judicial appointments and lifetime appointments from federal judges is nowhere on the radar for our organization.
I wonder, Bill, and there are others, maybe Colleen and Donna want to weigh in, who would say that that it has to do with the extreme partisan split on the court right now and the manner in which that split came into existence. And I'm talking about the Heritage Society and Leonard Leo and the feeding of judicial appointments with very specific agendas in their pockets. And I think that's probably a situation that the league doesn't want to touch right now because it is so very partisan.
Well, so the three most current appointed judges to the Supreme Court, even if there was a 15-year time limit, they're still on they're still on the Supreme Court. What I'm asking is, how does the league view lifetime appointment? It has nothing to do with because the politics can still happen. We saw that under the former president. He got to appoint 3 judges, and the legislature came in and took one away from one president, gave it to another president, and all that hullabaloo. But now it means that it changes the court for decades. And I'm surprised that the league thinks that that's an okay thing, even given our current politics and the political divide that exists in our country. I don't see our country, given the last 10 years, changing anytime soon going forward. So I'm just asking, how would an individual or organization change the Constitution? And we belong to a large group.
Well, I think we just go to the convention and we propose it.
Yeah. I think it's education-wise too, because a lot of people don't know what is required, even in judicial versus state. They just don't know. Not everybody majored in school in history and governance.
And they're not teaching civics. I mean, the county's trying to come up with a civics initiative that I'm a part of to try to get something in consistently about civics per se. And I will say this, there's a wonderful, he's a dean of a law school, but he's a prolific writer on the Constitution, and if you ever have a chance to, he's come to Stockton once before, and I always get a chance to hear him speak, but Erwin Chemerinsky is fantastic if you ever have an opportunity to hear him speak about the Constitution. But he said at a lecture to judges about a year ago, people will talk about it, but nobody's interested in doing anything about it. And it's because the issue of the day is there's always something more pressing, always something more important, always something more to move over here to this than that. And I gotta tell you, it's also, for people in Congress, it's probably not a very sexy topic that are gonna win them votes. And that generally is what, unfortunately, steers a lot of what their agenda is. I'm not saying everybody, I'm just saying that, but he has written articles about it, and he talks a lot of his fantastic presentation on the First Amendment as well. But his opinion is that it's not something that is as important as so many other things they have to deal with in the term that they have, and people are just not interested in fixing it. There's a movement in California among judges to fix how judges are recalled. There was a judge in 2018 that was recalled from Santa Clara County Superior Court. His name is Erin, and a lot of misinformation in the media about a case involving a Stanford athlete. And he was recalled based largely on false information that was presented to the general public. And so they're trying to amend the Constitution of California to correct that a judge can only be impeached for a crime or unethical behavior, like to limit the basis of the recall, not because you disagree with the judge's decision, because he lost his retirement, and I mean, he can never be a judge again. And he adopted a recommendation by the probation department relative to the sentencing, and nobody knew that when they polled people and asked them what they thought about what this judge did wrong. Nobody knew that he actually adopted what someone who's experienced in dealing with these types of cases, and the fact that also the judge was a former district attorney. But in any event, there had been a movement to try to amend our Constitution to fix recall of judges. And a lot of people said, nobody's gonna care. Nobody is gonna care to fix it. There's not gonna be enough momentum. There's not gonna be enough coalition around trying to resolve this problem. So I'm not suggesting not. I'm just saying that when it comes up, it doesn't seem to be the hot button.
So, thank you for all the information you shared, and this is really interesting. On a personal note, what do you like about your job, and what do you not so much like about your job?
Good question. I really enjoy the learning. I'm a lifelong learner. I love the constant learning. I love the fact that I get to do a variety of things, and I am learning something new each and every day. And I really enjoy when I do jury trials. I love when the people come in and I get to talk to our citizens and our community, and I get to say how important jury duty is. I have a slide on it in a few minutes. I know we're going to be out of time soon. And so I what gets me up and excited every day, it really is to be a public servant, and I understand the role and the importance of being in this role, and I never take it lightly. I don't know that there's anything that I dislike, but there are some really hard days. I have to say, sitting through victim impact statements, so if somebody has either been found guilty or they pled guilty, and you have to sit through and listen to the trauma that has happened to them. And quite honestly, there are times when I won't have any ability to do anything other than what the law mandates me to do, because that's my job. And that may not be justice for this family, for what their loss is that's left behind. And that's just as a human being, a really tough spot to be in. But I explained to them how grateful I am that they came today, that perhaps this is part of the grieving process and that I want to hear from them. But generally they all know whatever the sentence is that's going to be imposed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it makes their lives any better. And I try to recognize that and show some compassion and some empathy, but those can be really hard days. So, not bad days, just hard days.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just, so Bill, the league, I mean, I think you'd have to have the issue that you'd want to have changed in the Constitution. And even the ERA sits there dwindling. I mean, it's just kind of like hanging out. And so I think when there's an issue, then we need to bring it to the league's attention and then work really, really, really hard, like harder than I want to work, so I'm not there. The other thing I want to say, so this is an aside. So Elie Mistal, I don't know how many of you have seen him on TV. He's a black man that's very vocal about different issues. He wrote a book called Allow Me to Retort. And he kind of picks up, have you seen it?
I have not, I'm gonna write it down now.
He kind of picks apart the Constitution, and it's fascinating because he goes back to the founders and he goes back what they meant. And there's the whole 2/3 person, and there's all these things that are and so we amend the Constitution, but we never eliminate the first part completely. At the same time, so he talks about all these issues that are issues with serious issues. He says, but I would have traded for you don't want to get rid of it. You don't want to get rid of it, and you don't want to start with nothing because that's really, really dangerous. So he's just. It was fascinating to read, and I don't read a whole lot these days.
And I hate to say this, but sometimes change happens through crisis. I mean, look at all I can say personally at the court, all the things that changed because of COVID. We have electronic filing, which to think in 2020, we didn't have electronic filing, a means of which people can be on their computer filing documents, that you still have to show up and file paper, that you can resolve your traffic ticket online on the court's website. You don't have to wait in line and miss a day of work. But all of those things happened more out of a crisis, an emergency. And so I'm not suggesting we wait for the next crisis to do anything that the league wants to do, but I just find the impetus for it is crisis or loss or devastation. And it just seems to be how government wakes up and improves. So, yeah.
I'd just like to make one point about the nature of league positions, because we have talked about the league taking positions. The state league takes positions where it can reach a consensus in the state memberships. The National League must deal with the national membership. So however much California might want term limits for the Supreme Court, and I think we probably would vote for that if it ever came up on a ballot, the National League is not going to take that position because it cannot reach a consensus. So if you read the positions, you find that as you go up to the national level, they become very general, much more abstract. And that's the reason why, because in order to be there at all, they have to be the result of a consensus of the same things.
I think you just had a couple more slides. There's one slide I think sketch you. You're fine. I wasn't. And I just was about voting because we're at the. I didn't want you to think I didn't care about the 26th Amendment and voting. And then when it became law in 1971, we'll go to which I always remind all of my young people people that when they turn 18, voting happens, jury duty happens. I'm sure all of you never try at any time to get out of jury duty. And my big pitch, no matter what group I talk to, and Kathy knows this about me because I even do it at the Athena Awards, is reminding people the importance of performing their civic duty, because the right to a jury trial is guaranteed by both the 5th and 7th Amendment of the United States Constitution, and it is incredibly important to serve on a jury, and the impact it has on people's lives, whether it be criminal or civil, is just, I can't even express to you in words, and it's so meaningful. So when you get your summons or your neighbor gets your summons, and I get this question all the time, but I'm too old to serve for jury duty. Nope, there's no age cutoff. There's no age limit. You're not too old to serve on jury duty. The minimum age is 18. And so I posed this question, and I know we're going to be out of time soon, I have a couple more slides, but I didn't know if anyone had any opinions about this law has changed about who can serve on jury duty. So felons used to be prohibited from serving on jury duty, and the legislature in California changed that 5 years ago. And so if you're not actively on parole or probation, which I will tell you, I've had people come into jury duty and they'll raise their hands kind of meekishly and they'll say, well, Judge, I was convicted of a felony, and then I have to ask, are you currently serving on parole or probation? And if they say no, then they're eligible, and they can continue to be in the pool of jurors that can be selected. Yeah?
I'm trying to remember, before COVID, they had a big fair at Delta College where they actually had lawyers there talking to individuals so that they could, decide if they want to vote. And so I remember, because I was the one who was over. So I'm saying that the reason would be to have them to come in and talk to an attorney.
I don't, well, the law changed a lot in 2018 about reductions in certain crimes, so the lawyers could have been there for a number of different reasons. But you are allowed to serve on a jury now, even if you're convicted of a felony. Certain crimes were reduced to a misdemeanor. There's a lot of changes, and I know they do those fairs to inform people of their rights.
And I've met several people, and they said, oh, I need to do that because I can't vote, and they don't, maybe it's to let them know that they could vote at the time.
Right, and serve on the jury. It should be on the summons you get, but I'm sure you all never try to get out of jury duty or help your neighbors get out. And I'm always grateful, and I know every judge, because there's times very recently, and people don't realize this, every person we summoned was needed for that many trials that we had going out, which is that many people facing potentially prison if it's a criminal case, or if they're in a civil case, they want their day in court. And so when we're summoning people, and we have been using jurors, we've been in lots, I was in back-to-back-to-back jury trials over the summer. It's been very busy, so we'll go. I just showed this picture. I don't know if any of you seen the Jury Duty show on Netflix. It's funny if you watch the first episode. But I just want to know why people try to get out of jury service when it's guaranteed right under the Constitution. Does anyone have any tips to share with me so I know how to encourage people otherwise?
It's tiring.
It's tiring, okay.
At least the system is better now. You phone in to find out where your group is.
Mm-hmm.
Much better than actually having to go down and sit there all day.
Yeah, wait in a long line, right?
Minimum wage.
Yeah, it's $15
I mean, what do you get for going in one day? You get $16.
Plus your parking fee.
And your parking fee. But if I had to take off work and I don't get paid because I didn't work, I should be compensated at minimum wage hours. And depending on where I work.
That's your duty as a citizen of the United States. What's
Good.
the matter with you?
Pay me.
No pay.
So you know what's fascinating? There's a county that actually has a pilot program that's been going on right now to pay jurors, as you're suggesting, sir, of what the equivalent would be for a day's work. And they were able to get the funding from businesses in the area to do this, to see if more people would be willing to serve on the jury. If it's a short trial, I try to encourage people, and I know they don't like it, but I'm like, do you have sick time you can use or paid time off? It's just gonna be a couple of days. my concern is that if I let every juror go who's not paid for service, that is a cross-section of the community that is not serving on this person's jury. On this person's jury. And I just get concerned about that over time, that there's something in that group that's being lost in terms of their voice and the participation in the system.
I think we should just use state and federal and county people because they're gonna get paid no matter what.
That is what I get. I get all, yes. And retirees, if they don't think they're too old. But I literally had this lady say, isn't there an age cutoff? And I'm passing age. And I'm like, there's not. There's no limit. You can serve. It's just 18 and that's it. So, yeah.
I think sometimes a lot of people don't want to serve because they're afraid they'll be tied up for a month or 2 months, you know. And that is a long time in position to their lives.
It is, and I will say, you know, and I always tell people, if you can't serve, you know, some trials are really long, sometimes trials are really short. My courtroom clerk, she's serving now, it's 4 days. Most people can do a 3 or 4 day trial, but you're right. One of the trials I had this summer, 9 weeks. It's a long time to ask somebody to be, we had days off, and the schedule was varied from week to week, so people could go to appointments or that sort of thing, but you're right, that's a big commitment we're asking you to make in your life, so I get that. So. Any more questions? And so, as we've gone over this, and again, impeachment is federal judges and the president, and again, state judges are not subject to that, not subject to impeachment. You're either removed from office by the Commission on Judicial Performance, or you're ousted by recall or somebody running against you. But on the federal system, it's impeachment for judges. It's the only way you can remove a federal judge. So I put this on here. This is actually the current court. I think on the paper I gave you was before we had 2 of our new Supreme Court justices. Does anyone know how many justices are on the California Supreme Court?
11.
I heard the right answer. Somebody
11?
said on the California Supreme Court. Somebody said it. Say your number again. Nobody wants to say no. There's 9 on the U.S. We have 7. And there's 7 California Supreme Court justices. There's 9 on the federal system. I don't know if does everyone know that, of course, the Chief Justice is in the middle, but it's by tenure. They're sitting in the front row by how long they've served, and the back row are the newest justices, is how they are seated. In California, we have a new Chief Justice. Our prior Chief Justice retired after 12 years, but the California Supreme Court has had a number of new appointments under Governor Newsom. He's probably changed 4 of the 7 seats, and under his term, now his 2nd term. And I don't think people realize that. The focus is usually on the feds, but in the state, more than half the court has been changed under this governor. So it just, for whatever reason, the state judicial system doesn't seem to get as much discussion as the federal system does. But it impacts, the decisions they make impact all of us because it's where we live. So, anyways. And then of course we know about the president and who appoints judges, and then my last slide. No. You mentioned that about your book, the book you read. And that was something I was thinking about last night, is that we can complain about the Constitution, or we can find ways to improve it, but I also believe the form of government we have is the best. And I can't come up with, and I haven't had scholars tell me a better form of government that we have, and with the branches, and that it's lasted as long as it has. And I'm not sure that founding fathers, the framers, ever contemplated it was last as long as it did. But all the different studies and scholars and articles that I read, no one can come up with a better system of government. Yes.
So I have one more question to stir the pot. If the First Amendment is the right of free speech, and that's universal across the country, why can a state ban a book?
I don't know what their state constitution says.
But doesn't...
And somebody would have to bring that to the court.
So that would have to go to the Supreme Court to say, you can't ban books.
It would probably, so if a particular state is banning a book, for example, then that case would likely need to be filed in the state in which it's banning it. So we can use Florida, I'm sure that's what people are thinking about. And so you'd have to file an action in state court in Florida, and then it would make its way up the channels like in the depiction I had. And if the Supreme Court decided to take it up, then they could be the final voice, but the Florida Supreme Court could also end up being the final voice.
So to make that happen, Susan would have to move to Florida.
Yeah.
What?
I visit.
What?
I'll come visit.
I'm busy, yeah. And I just thought too, because without the Constitution, it was, to me, it was like thinking about it last night. We have no Congress, no president, no Supreme Court. We wouldn't have any of the basic form of government that we have. And I just think of, when we think about the Constitution and the creation of our nation, I think oftentimes we always focus on our differences, but we have so many similarities and so many beliefs rooted in the Constitution, principles that we believe in. I think that we all share, even if there's varying degrees of where we differ. We all respect a lot of the principles that are embodied in there. That you would want separate judiciary, you want a separate but equal branches, the checks and balances of our system and how it operates. And so we may disagree on a judge's particular decision or on the president passing this or the governor doing that, but at the end of the day, I think we find a lot more agreement points than we find disagreement points. So, and to me, when I think of the Constitution, the word that came to my mind was empowerment, because I think it gives us so many opportunities in so many different ways, and it affects so many aspects of our life. And again, I know I must deal with 3 or 4 amendments every day, whether it be if I'm doing a criminal case and advising somebody of their right to an attorney, their right to a speedy and public trial in front of a judge or jury, whether I am in a civil case and they have the right to a jury trial, whether I'm giving the person the opportunity to be heard and come to court, which is part of the government, to redress their grievances. It impacts me in so many ways, but I think in all the things we've talked about today, I know it impacts all of you and others in your life. So hopefully I've impressed upon you why I think the Constitution is important, and you continue to get the good word out and all the good work that you're doing. But to me, that was the symbol of the Constitution. And of course, I love Lady Justice. So I have like 3 statues of her in my office, and we have a beautiful statue of her outside of the courthouse, which actually came from the original courthouse that was built in 1890. She was preserved, and she's the gold statue that sits outside the Stockton downtown courthouse, is from inside of the top of the old courthouse that was built in the 1890s. Wow. So, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.